As a 30-year-old American with a college degree and skills, I was making just $6 a day in Mexico. Can you imagine throwing some essentials into a pack, slinging that pack on your shoulder, and starting to walk across the desert to start a life as an undocumented immigrant in a country that you've never visited before? What is the day-to-day economic reality for many Mexicans?
Yo no me atrevo a bailar arriba de esa tarima. Yo no me atrevo a bailar arriba.
Welcome to the Everything Mexico channel. I am your host, Richard. After college, I started working as a manager for a staffing company in Colorado. The main reason I was hired was because I spoke fluent Spanish, and many of the employees at the company spoke only Spanish. Shortly after starting my new job, I was reviewing applications and interviewing applicants in Spanish. As part of the process, I'd need to see their green cards, make a copy, and keep it on file. My first wife had come to the United States a few years earlier and had gone through the process of getting her quote-unquote green card, in this case her residency. The first time I saw one of the green cards that an applicant brought into the office, I thought to myself, this looks a little strange. At the very top of our application, written in Spanish, was the question, can you work legally in the United States? Yes or no? Not long after I started, a Mexican applicant checked no. Of course, I couldn't hire him. It was a Friday. He came back the next Monday with his green card, filled out a new application, and checked yes, that he did have a legal right to work in the United States. As far as I knew, it took months or maybe years to get a green card, so I was wondering what was up. Not too long after that, I wanted to send Jorge out to work. He was in the waiting room talking to some other workers. I said, Jorge, 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 and he didn't respond. One of the workers beside him nudged him to indicate that I wanted to talk to him. I thought that was odd too. It should have been easy to hear me. Despite these oddities, they were very hardworking, motivated, and overall great employees. When I would come to open the office in the early morning, we were in the high Rockies in central Colorado, and it was often quite cold. Snow, ice, 20 degrees Fahrenheit to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet, the applicants, recently hired employees, looking for a job, would be waiting outside the office doors to get in the hopes that they could find work. Most of them were also quite social and very inclusive. Being that I spoke Spanish fluently, all I had to do was be amicable, listen carefully, and wait, and I knew I'd have my answers. Meanwhile, I spent a part of my time wondering, how bad were things in Mexico and Central America for these immigrants to come from so far away to do a job in the snow and ice for $10 an hour, far, far from their families? After finishing high school in the United States, I'd spent a year in Ecuador as a Rotary Club exchange student. The experience changed my life more than any other year had up to that point. To go from living in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in western Pennsylvania to the central part of the Andes just outside of Quito in Ecuador was a mind-opening experience that I will always cherish. When I woke up for the first time on my first day in Ecuador with my new host family in my new bedroom and looked out the window and saw the spectacular Andes Mountains rising up into the sky, that's an image that is still sharply ingrained in my mind today. However, as time progressed, mingled with the beauty of the Andes, the crisp air, and the new culture that I was experiencing, there was a feeling that I was privileged and protected. I could see a lot of people outside my day-to-day circle who were in need. Just outside the walls of our gated community, I would see an old lady herding 2 cows. When I'd go into the Capitol and have a bite to eat, people would come up to me and ask me for money or food. I had only lived in the United States up until that point, so I had never been in a society where there was such a vast difference between the haves and the have-nots. In my hometown, a poor person had a modest house or apartment and a humble vehicle, while a wealthy person had a larger home and a more expensive vehicle. But in Ecuador, I found myself living in a situation where the wealthy people had large, luxurious homes and nice vehicles, and the poorer class had a decrepit bicycle and a shack. The curiosity that arose in me in Ecuador as to why some societies seem to have so much more equality of opportunity than others was still strong in me when I was working at the staffing company. I wanted to know why. I mean, really, think about this carefully for a moment, but really think about it. Imagine taking a few sets of clothing, a toothbrush, your smartphone, some cash, stuffing it in a pack and slinging this pack over your shoulder. Then you say goodbye to your partner, your husband or wife, and maybe your kids, and you're off. You catch a bus, and you travel close to where your country borders on a wealthier country. Then you meet up with someone you've never met before, a total stranger, whom you've paid a few $1,000s to take you across the desert into this wealthier country. You and others with the same need, the same desire to better their lives will follow this coyote as their guide across the desert into foreign lands. You've never been there before, but you believe in your heart that you will be afforded new opportunities and a new lease on life. You are about to cross miles upon miles, kilometers upon kilometers of dry, rough terrain, sprinkled with cactuses and no water. You and those that are with you are not adventurers, soldiers, extreme athletes. They are normal people trying to get to a new land to start a new life. You are just an average citizen. You walk a few miles a day on the sidewalk, on the street, around the store, at work. You have not meticulously prepared for this moment. You have also heard the stories. You know people die in the deserts trying to cross over. They die from dehydration, from exhaustion, because they've gotten lost and can't find their way, or because they've been abandoned. Yet, even with this stark realization that you could die, you start your journey and begin walking. After a few miles of walking, you realize your shoes are inadequate. You also see that 3-liter bottle of water that looks so large when you were at the bus stop is looking mighty small as you are chugging it down in the hot, hot sun in the desert heat. You are soaked in sweat, the insects are biting. All you see is cactus and blue skies and the baking sun. You see bones in the dirt. Are they human? 2 young men from your group are falling behind. One is limping and the other appears ill. If you wait for them, you'll run out of water and burn in the sweltering sun. So you march on. Finally, after 12 hours of walking, you come close to a road. The coyote says you've made it. You sit under a tree with the others and rest and wait. A bit later, a van comes by and picks you and the group up and takes you to a small house where you wait away from the windows. The coyote lets you use a phone to call your relatives to inform them that you have safely made it to the United States so that they can make the second and final payment. You paid $2,000 before you met the coyote, and you're paying another $2,000 now to complete the $4,000 smuggling fee. In another 2 to 3 days, you'll be at your uncle's house in a small town that you've never heard of. Your uncle made the same journey 5 years ago, and he has paid for your trip with the expectation that you will pay him back. He'll help you find a job, and he'll give you a place to live at least until he's been repaid. You start your new job making $10 an hour landscaping. It's hard work in the sun all day, raking, digging holes, unloading trees, planting trees, pruning, but you're making $10 an hour. At your last job in Mexico, you were making a little over $1 an hour at the shoe store. So you are happy. You are working twice as hard, and you are far from your partner and kids, but you are making a lot more money. You're making about $500 a week, and you give $250 of that, about half of what you're making, to your uncle each week to repay the money that he spent to enable you to get to the United States. You send $250 a week back to your family in Mexico, and they take $100 of that and use it for their day-to-day expenses, applying the other $150 to the $11,000 piece of property that you are trying to purchase. In the end, it takes about 2 years of working at the landscaping job for you to finish paying off the property. You talk to your partner on the phone, but thousands of miles separate you. Your partner can't come to visit you because they can't get a visa to legally travel to the United States, and it's too dangerous to come by any other means. If you go back to visit your partner and your children, the only way you can return is to come back the way you came, and you really don't want to do that again, so you're really hesitant to visit. It's also tough and stressful to be constantly worried about being deported or thrown in jail because of your undocumented status. So for now, you're pushing on and you're starting to build your house. You've gained some skills and shown yourself to be a good worker, so a friend hires you as a mason's helper, and now you're making $15 an hour. It's backbreaking work, but you're able to send a lot more money home. One evening you come home from work and a friend contacts you and says he's seen your partner going out with someone. It happens all the time when families are separated for long periods of time. So now, is your partner being unfaithful to you too? You were lucky. It turns out to just be gossip and a false alarm. But in the back of your mind, you know the longer you're away, the greater the possibility that it could happen. After all, you've been gone for years now. You are also finding it harder and harder to think about going home because you have gotten more and more comfortable with your new life. You have gotten more accustomed to having more money in your family, too. The question arises, what will I do if I go back? How will I make a living to sustain the lifestyle that we all now have? It would be really difficult to go back to making $1, $2, maybe $3 an hour. You have a new skill set and you have learned a lot in the United States. But many of these skill sets do not apply back in Mexico, or if they do apply, you will be paid a much, much lower wage for those same jobs. The situation that I have just described is the situation that millions of immigrants in the United States, millions of which are Mexican, are facing on a day-to-day basis. And many of these immigrants are undocumented and have no way to become legal immigrants. Please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It really helps the channel and we appreciate your support. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, we'll leave a link in the description below. It turned out that the real reason that worker left the office on a Friday saying he did not have permission to work legally in the United States and came back on a Monday checking the other box on a new application saying that he could work legally in the United States was possible because he went to Denver and spent a few $100s to get his falsified green card. It was impossible for him to get legal permission to work in the United States, so he did what he thought best, and he got a false document to allow him to work. This explained the lack of coherence in my mind as to how he was able to do this in such a short amount of time. The reason the worker Jorge did not answer when I called his name was because his name was not Jorge. He was using someone else's legal documentation to work in the United States, whose name was Jorge. But Jorge's real name was Roberto. He had not yet gotten accustomed to his new name. While what they were doing is illegal, it's difficult to judge a person harshly for wanting to make a decent living and who makes great personal sacrifice to do so, putting in a hard day's work for relatively low wages in a far, far, far away land. During the time I was managing at the staffing agency, I was thinking about getting my master's or PhD in Latin American studies. But I always came full circle back to the realization that my year in Ecuador had been as valuable for my understanding of Latin America, or perhaps even more valuable than the 4 years I put in at the university studying Latin America in Pennsylvania and Washington, D.C. My thinking was, if you were a cardiologist and you knew that you could live in the human heart, the arteries and veins, for an extended period of time, you would know so much more than other cardiologists who had studied the cardiovascular system in a classroom. You would gain a practical understanding from hands-on experience that would be unparalleled. And nearly impossible to replicate in a classroom. If you wanted to truly understand our hemisphere and most of the country south of the U.S. border, what better way of doing so than going there, living, and working? I had studied in Ecuador, studied in Cuba, and been a tourist traveling in the region, in Peru, in Mexico, in Colombia. Yet I had never worked in the region. As a tourist, my money came from the United States. As a student, my money came from different sources, but did not come from work that I was doing in Latin America. I concluded that the best way to come to the deepest understanding was to live in the region and support myself with money that I was making solely from my work there. Only then would my reality force me to comprehend what life was really like and why. 2 weeks before turning 30, on January 1st, 2006, I started pedaling my Cannondale mountain bike from the border of Texas down through Mexico with the intention of making this dream come true. Little did I know what difficult challenges I would face. If I had known, it is quite likely that I would not have had the courage to start the journey. The next 17 years in Mexico and Latin America were fraught with challenges, some of them life-threatening. My first job was at a mango orchard, making $6 a day. I was making as much money in a day as I'd made at my previous job in about 14 minutes. Making $6 a day as a 30-year-old, relatively skilled college graduate from the United States teaches you so much about the unfortunate reality that so many, too many people are living. By only my second month in Mexico, I had a good understanding of why almost all Mexicans know someone from Mexico who is working as an undocumented immigrant in the United States. Understanding the cost of living is essential to understanding how much money is worth. While the cost of living is low in Mexico, $6 a day will just cover your basics like food, toothpaste. During the time I was working in the mango orchards and I was waiting for the mango pickers to lower their net baskets of mangoes out of the trees, I had plenty of time to philosophize and think about my situation. And I realized that if someone gifted me a car, I wouldn't be able to use it. I'd spend my entire day's wages on 1.5 gallons of gasoline. How far will that get you? And if I did, I wouldn't be able to eat. A full week's work would get me 8 gallons of gasoline if I spent my entire earnings only on gasoline. While I was working for these wages of my own volition, those Mexicans that were working around me were doing it out of necessity. I think of it as a cash-scarce society. The basic food basket is affordable, but beyond that, it's a real struggle to truly get ahead. Now, can you understand why so many Mexicans immigrate to the United States? After my stint in the mango orchard, I started working as a tour guide, running my own business and making $40 a day. Not a salary to brag about in the wealthier countries, but much better than $6 a day. At any time, I could have gone back to the United States, but I pushed ahead and continued to fight. I was determined to see how far I could go in Mexico. Over the following years, I was selling peanuts, bread, fish. In my second year, I got into teaching. Using all of my resourcefulness, with a lot of motivation, at the end of 15 years, I had my own small private school, a pizza shop, and a CrossFit box. I was proud to be making $90 a day of pure profit, net profit, even though there were no foreigners in the area. It worked out to be about $2,700 a month. This too may not seem like a lot, but the median Mexican individual income is about $3,000 per year. So at this point, I was making almost as much in a month as the median income in a year. I was solidly in the Mexican upper class. Adjusted for the cost of living, life had dramatically improved. Yet, it was still difficult to travel internationally to many parts of the world, whereas even with a middle-class job in the United States, with the average college grad making about $55,000 a year, it would have been much simpler to travel overseas due to the power of the dollar compared to most other currencies. Most people aren't aware of this, but while U.S. law strictly controls immigration to the United States, there is a second, informal system that allows undocumented immigrants to work. Because so many undocumented immigrants are very hardworking and willing to put in longer hours for relatively low wages, they are in high demand in certain sectors of the U.S. economy, especially construction, agriculture, landscaping, housekeeping, restaurant work, the manual labor jobs. Businesses in those sectors don't want the government cracking down on undocumented immigrants. The result is that you have many millions of undocumented workers picking fruit, working in restaurants, doing housekeeping, carpentry, mason work, and many, many other very intensive manual labor jobs. With lower labor costs, profits are higher for owners and managers. With so much money to be made off these workers, strict enforcement of laws is rare. While these workers are used to make money, they are almost all willingly complicit because they too are making more money than they ever have before. Ironically, it's basically a win-win situation. Because owner-manager teams and workers benefit, there is little incentive for real change to the immigration system to eliminate this informal sector, to create a better, above-board legal system that would give these workers legal status to work and live in the United States. After making $6 a day, in my experiences of the following years, there remained no doubt in my mind as to why people were immigrating to the United States. Can you get ahead in Mexico? Of course you can. Men and women around the world wake up in dire circumstances, fighting to better their lives. And they do. However, given the same skill set, intelligence, and motivation, how much you accomplish depends greatly upon the system you are in. Some countries allow you to dream and fly to great heights. Others are constantly smashing your dreams and barely allowing you to flutter frantically above the ground. The U.S., despite so much negativity permeating the news, is still a land of great opportunity compared to many places around the world. There is a famous saying in Mexico that goes, "Ah, Mexico, so far from God and so close to the United States." In Spanish, México, tan lejos de Dios y tan cerca a los Estados Unidos. Mexicans say this with some ironic humor because many flock to the economic giant above them in the hope of having a better future. If you have any topics you would like me to cover regarding Mexico, please put them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching Everything Mexico, and I hope to see you on the next episode.